real-world writing is what they need to be doing.
Well, I was going to say that this is taken from California test,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all, marijuana is so legal out there that I can see where the police might be in envelopes.
Edit.
Touche. Excellent point. All right, the world of literacy is changing. There's a concept now known as the citizen journalist. The idea that people on the street are reporting news now. Monday I was watching Channel 6 and they had the big board and they were doing the weather reports with all the storms that rolled through. And it was a Twitter feed and people were tweeting in pictures of different areas where they were living and the flood waters coming up to their steps. And think about this, these students of ours now are processing all this type of information. It's very different. They have to think really critically about what the source of the information is. Is it valid? Is it relevant to them? So our world has changed and the way we get our information has changed. And people on the streets are now reporting news. And you have to take that with a grain of salt because their point of view is involved. So does that change the way we look at things? So it really does. Having immediate access to all enormous amounts of information changes the depth of literacy that students need to have. They have to be able to think more critically and be analytical in their thinking and in their writing. Plus, not to mention, the Common Core state standards demand it. I mean, we can't get away from the fact that they are looking for a lot of different things now. And there are some good websites here if you go read about the core standards. And Achieve the Core has a lot of great lesson plans for how to implement these into your lessons. But moving on, I wanted to focus on some shifts in the standards. Language arts, I want you to look at some of these words. Content-rich, nonfiction, so like I talked about earlier, the split now, 50% nonfiction, 50% fiction, and then even more so in the secondary levels. Reading, writing, speaking, grounded evidence from text. This is big. But really, the questions, not only the standards, but the questions on the new PARC assessment are really geared more towards students pulling sentences from the text as proof. Nobody really, I hate to say this, nobody really cares that much about opinions anymore. They still have to write arguments, of course, but everything has to really be based on fact. And regular practice with complex text in its academic language. So our questions really need to be text dependent. You should think about that when you're designing your assessments and your quizzes and whatnot. And even in math, for Mike, the rigor that they're demanding, they have to demonstrate conceptual understanding. Now, to understand a concept, a lot of times you have to be able to explain it to somebody. So they can explain it verbally, or they can explain it in writing. But because they say if you understand something, you can explain it to someone else. So they have to be able to demonstrate that as well. So moving towards, let's talk about the group of learners that we have. Joe might teach junior high, Tracy, you're 5th grade, but they're saying that adolescence starts earlier now. So even 4th graders and 5th graders, I'm sure you see are beginning adolescence. They have a lot of different needs, and we need to take those into consideration when we design our lessons. They need to have control, so giving them more choice in the kind of topics they want to do, and even in the way they want to present their reports, whether it's PowerPoint or putting on a skit. Giving them choice makes them feel like they're in control. They have an interest in technology. We need to take advantage of that, of course, through presentations such as this. But even blogging, there's a website called EduBlogs, and I have one set up for my classes. And it's great because you should hear some of the writing that they do when they're writing for that audience, for their peers. It's really a lot more in-depth than you would think it would be. I used to feel that writing on the computer wasn't the same as pen and pencil, but I've changed that from the writing that I've seen my students doing. So we need to take advantage of the fact that they love media. They need to be heard, so they want to have authentic audiences. Don't make them write for you all the time. Have them write for other people. Maybe they want to write a letter to a company. They really like their product. Maybe there's a new sneaker out and they really like that and they want to ask the company about it, or they want to criticize something. They love to debate. I'm sure we all know that, which is great though. It's wonderful because they have to ground their opinions in factual evidence. So split your class into 2 teams and have them gather evidence, give them a topic to debate. One of my best lessons was kind of off the cuff last year. We had read The Outsiders, the 8th graders, and the students wanted to debate whether Honeyboy was guilty of murder, whether he should be brought up on charges. And they were pulling all these facts from the book. So you have to kind of go with the flow and go with what their interests are. They need to make a difference. So reading to others, peer editing, that makes them feel good about themselves while reinforcing the skills that they have. They have a need to belong. So develop a community of readers and writers in your class. writing is a social activity, and it can be. A lot of times it's viewed as an isolated thing. Like when you guys were writing earlier, that was more an independent activity. But having them get together and group write, they need to hear their ideas out loud as well. That's very
Now,
important.
read to others. Is that reading in the classroom from a text material?
It can be.
Yeah.
It can be pair reading, reading out loud, model reading too from the teacher. It's really good for them to hear you reading. Not the entire time, of course, because then you lose their attention. But they need to hear good reading. Last but certainly not least, a sense of accomplishment. They need to set goals for themselves, monitor their own progress. It makes them feel good about themselves when they. Let's face it, these questions, these tests, these prompts, it can be really intimidating, and long pieces of writing are intimidating. So that's why today, coming up, I'm going to show you some examples of shorter pieces of writing that you can do with your classes, and it'll make them feel a bit more successful. So again, what motivates adolescents to write? Real reasons, reading and writing in conjunction with hands-on activities. Maybe they could perform a script. They write a chapter, and then you have, or maybe they could be the teacher for the day to demonstrate what they have learned. This is just another quote from research. Teachers who link instruction with needs, interests, and dispositions of students when designing reading and writing assignments nurture a connection that motivates students to engage with authentic literacy text. So those words again, connection, motivation, authentic, keeping it real types of writing. Okay. So now remember, ready to learn, the emphasis is really on the process, not the product. It's not that you want a perfect paper. You're using writing as an extension of thought. Make sure that when you assign anything that's written, no matter what you're teaching, you give them a rationale. You get the question all the time, why are we doing this? It's okay to share it with them. Don't just say it because I told you so. Give them a reason behind it, and most likely if they understand why they're doing it, they'll be a little bit more likely to go along with it. Do the activity along with them. As you saw earlier, I sat down and I wrote with you. It builds credibility, and for them to see that you're thinking through the writing is really good. Tell them what the next steps are. They always want to know, is this going to be counted as a quiz grade? And sometimes you cringe when you hear that question, but they should know, and they should be given some kind of credit for it. There's different things you could do. Maybe you could collect all of them and grade 5 of them, but they don't know which 5 are going to be graded, so they're still going to be trying to do their best. Or with the writing to learn activities I'm going to show you, maybe they could hold on to them for an entire marking period, and then at the end of the marking period, pick 5 that they like the best, and you'll read that as a project. So they should get some type of credit for it. It doesn't have to be a test grade. Be clear about who the audience is that they're writing for, because sometimes it gets a little personal, and if you call on them in class and they didn't think they were going to have to share, they might be a little bit embarrassed, and you don't want to put them on the spot like that. So make sure they know who the audience is. Specific time limits are good. I like to use a timer, because if they're just writing and they think they have forever, they're kind of looking up at the clock or they're looking out the window. But if they know they have 5 minutes to get something done, it seems more manageable and more attainable. Okay. Why use writing to learn? It optimizes learning in the content areas. Being able to express your thinking in writing is a skill that they'll take away with them, outside of school, on the job. Okay, so now, moving into writing to learn assignments. Now we're getting into the specifics. They're short, 3 to 15 minutes. You're asking students to write maybe just a word, a sentence, a question, a paragraph or 2. They're integrated explicitly into your content, so you always have to draw on what they're learning. Okay, make sure it's just not writing that doesn't seem to have anything to do with what you're teaching them. They receive a content-focused response. So in other words, you're not grading them for grammar and language and mechanics. None of that. If they make mistakes, it's okay. They get better as they write more. And also, you have to build a stamina for writing. It's kind of like running. You do 1 mile, maybe you're a little bit tired because you've been away from it for a while. So they need to build their stamina for writing as well. Not formally graded writing to learn assignments, but they should count for something. They should be given credit for their work. Okay, so these are the specific types of things in your handout that I have for you that I'm going to be showing you. Maybe you can take an idea away today that you think you could use in your class. We're going to start with the micro theme. The title says a bit of what it is. Micro meaning small, and theme is another term for an essay. The thing with micro themes, more isn't necessarily better. It's a brief piece of writing. It can be used for analyzing and synthesizing things that they've learned. You can do it as a response to an open-ended question. Or they could give a summary of a lesson. And they can save the great thing about these is actually, I'm going to grab some index cards for you guys. But so there's something about doing something on like a 5x8 index card. It's not as intimidating. If you give them a blank sheet of paper, they look at it, oh my gosh, there's 2 sides, I have to fill all this. Or maybe just have them tear a half sheet of paper. It's easier for you to read because you have less to do. It's a real quick study guide for them as well. So they're summarizing a lesson on, maybe you're doing a long-term joke, the long-term causes of World War II. And you want them to write a paragraph about what the long-term causes were. And then they can use that later as their study guide. They could grab a study buddy. They could get together and prepare for the test using their micro themes. This is an example that was used in science. What relationships to other organisms does an adult river turtle have in this river community? And how do these relationships differ from those of a young river turtle? I'm not going to read this to you. You can read it on your own. But as you can see, because of the short amount of space and time that the student had to write this, they really have to know their facts. And they have to pull only the most pertinent information. So it's getting them able to do that, look over their notes and their text, and being able to just think about what's the most important. Then we have something else called a point of view guide, which can be used as a microtheme, but this requires a little bit more creativity on the part of the student because they're getting inside the skin of a character or a subject that's under study. These questions are presented in an interview format. So let's say for History Joe, maybe you're studying the Great Depression, and you want your students to research a farmer in the Great Depression who moved from the Great Plains to the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. So, and they're being interviewed by a magazine. So you can have them pretend to write from the point of view of the farmer being interviewed, and what was it like, and what was the experience. Maybe for math, you could do something like, oh, what's it like to be a quadrant, you know, and what kind of numbers go in certain quadrants, the first quadrant, the second quadrant. They could write about any concept that they've been learning about. But it engaged them to think more inferentially and speculate about things because they're putting themselves in somebody else's point of view. So hence the name Point of View Guide. Just an example at the bottom, going back to the river turtle. You're about to be interviewed as if you were a young river turtle or living in a river community along the west coast of Florida. As a young river turtle, what is your typical day like? See, so they're getting into character a bit. It's a more creative writing assignment, but then they're still bringing back what they know about the turtles, and they have to incorporate all of that. A little bit more creative. The unsaid letter is something else where they're role playing. You're asking them to respond to material that they're studying, but from the point of view of someone else. So again, interpreting and evaluating. You'll love this one, Joe.
No.
I didn't write it, I promise. I got it from Content Area Reading, a textbook that I've been using. So this is more personal informational writing as well. It's personal, but they still, yeah. It's Dear President Obama. But you know, you could write a letter, Dear President Obama, and have a very different opinion. I guess one requirement the students would have to know, since their audience is the president, they do have to be respectful. They're free to voice their opinions, but they're not supposed to use slang. But they'd be weaving into it current events, anything that they know from history, and they don't have to send a letter. They can send a letter if they want to. Absolutely. It'd be fun if they got answers back. The bio poem. The bio poem is another way to get students to write in a little bit more creative manner. It's formatted. You see there's 11 lines. So, but because of that structure, you're really focusing on critical thinking because they have to decide, well, what am I going to put on these 11 lines? So what are the most important pieces of information? This one's about trapezoid mics. So this is a math angle here. So now because you have to split line 1 is the first name and line 11 is the last name. See what they did there? Yeah. Okay, so trape on the first line, zoid on the last line. It can be used for any content area, history, math, science. I think it would work well for. So it's called a bio poem, and again, it's more formatted, but I think that forces them to think critically and to gather information that they've been learning. And then we have admit. What's that?
And to narrow it down.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what am I going to put in the bio poem? What's the most important thing? The admit slip, the exit slip. You might have heard of this. One is at the beginning of the class. One is at the end of the class. Sometimes people have do-nows that they do in their classroom. I guess you could liken it to a do-now, but sometimes do-nows are just something to settle the class while a teacher's collecting homework, and maybe they don't get revisited. With the admit slip, the students are posed a question or asked to write about a topic to contact